Please listen carefully.
Today, I interviewed with Nava Atlas, founder of the website, The Vegan Atlas. Nava has authored several vegan and vegetarian cookbooks, including Plant Power and Wild About Greens. In 1996, she started one of the first vegetarian food sites on the web, VegKitchen, which went vegan in 2010. Her recipes has been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and VegNews. In this interview, we discuss the role of women in vegan and vegetarian movements and the impact social justice plays in veganism.
I really do see that with people who are involved with the vegan movement, that there's like really a huge amount of intersectionality. And I find that's really gratifying, and that's something that I really would like to support.
I want to touch on that a bit more just because I write too. I'm not as accomplished as you are, like 12 to 15 cookbooks, and it seems like you have your work with publishers and you've gotten some notoriety from it. But that's an interesting thing. You talked about kind of all of these different parts of yourself intersecting. In what ways do you see someone who is interested in writing and who may actually be a vegan and be passionate about things like social justice, things that they can do to kind of incorporate all of those different identities into one?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. Just recently I got a recipe donated to the site by Vegan Mexican Cooking, which is a sister site of the Food Empowerment Project, which is a nonprofit. Let me go to this so I can quote it more directly. Mm-hmm. So I believe it was started in 2007 by, I believe someone who is a Latina. And so her mission is, quoted, to create a more just and sustainable world by recognizing the power of one's food choices. We encourage choices that reflect a more compassionate society by spotlighting the abuse of animals on farms, the depletion of natural resources, unfair working conditions for produce workers, the unavailability of healthy foods in communities of color and low-income areas, and the importance of not purchasing chocolate that comes from the worst forms of child labor. So really, right in that one paragraph, there are a number of, huge social justice issues, both human, animal, environmental. Mm-hmm. So that's where, just seeing how people who care about veganism, it's not just, I'm going to have a yummy meal, although of course that's a perk.
Yes.
But it really is about caring. It's about, excuse my French, but it's about giving a shit about something. And it really, sometimes when I know everybody can't go vegan, but when I encounter people who just are people who are really smart and have a lot of resources and are really privileged, and they don't think about, what kind of life that cow must have had when they talk about, I had this really amazing burger. And also people who say, I don't want to pay the few extra cents for this, organic strawberry. And, you have to remind people it's really not just about ingesting pesticides, but it's about farm workers getting sick. And they do get sick, when they have to work with produce that has pesticides. So I just, from the one thing that's on our plate, it's like the spoke of a wheel. So many things are related to it. Mm-hmm. So interestingly, when I first started out many, many years ago with just being a vegetarian, I just never liked meat. But, I grew up in a Eastern European Jewish family, and the food is just dreadful. I cannot begin to tell you. And I just hated my mom's cooking. And it was just a pain for me to eat. And we're just indoctrinated to what we grow up with. And I just, at a certain point, I just said to my mom, I think I was 14, my brother also, older brother, didn't want to eat meat. I asked my mom if I could cook so I could disguise it. And then maybe 2 years later, it occurred to me, you know what? I don't have to eat this at all. But, it wasn't really about anything. It was really about me not wanting to eat the meat. And then, my education, it's much easier now in the age of the internet to learn things. Interestingly, too, again, about my first book, Vegetariana, it's now 35 years old, and I'm thinking of revising it because it was kind of a cult classic. And as I look into, I did this whole introduction to the history of vegetarianism, and I feel like I was guilty of doing what everybody does, or everybody has been doing, which is erasing women. And I feel like, wow, I have to right that wrong. So, so I have a history of famous vegetarians. I have Leonardo da Vinci and George Bernard Shaw and, Gandhi. Of course, Gandhi was cool, but, Tolstoy and Percy Shelley. But most of them were just doing it because they wanted to live longer.
Yeah.
So, I mean, some of them thought it was, weird to eat animals, but I didn't learn about, there was this whole contingent of 19th century women who really were in it because of the animals. They did it because of the compassionate part of it and about how wrong they felt it was for humans to oppress animals. So interestingly, I kept researching and I thought, I'm uncovering this flood of famous vegetarians that I didn't know about. For example, Rosa Parks was a vegetarian for 40 years.
And I've never learned about that.
Well, I didn't know about that till last week, so don't feel bad. And so Coretta Scott King became vegan, and their son Dexter, one of their sons, is really very active in the animal rights movement. So that's really pretty fascinating.
Yeah, and I feel like it's very important that, especially women, our voices don't get lost kind of in, I guess, the shuffle.
Yeah, I just want to redo the book because I also want to veganize it. And I feel like after 35 years, I'm a, better artist and designer and everything, but also really to write women back into this. Also, it's filled with like literary quotations and folklore. And I bet it's just really way too male dominated. I want to add more women authors to it. The quotations are really about food specifically. So that's what I illustrate. And then there's the recipe to kind of go with it. But so I feel like there really is such a connection between all the various things I do. And I feel, I also feel very lucky that I can do it and kind of scratch out a living from doing it as well.
Walk me back into like what made you transition from being a vegetarian to being a vegan, and also what you like best about being a vegan.
Okay. So I didn't really answer being the transition from vegetarian to vegan, and that has a really interesting story too. So I have 2 kids, a son and a daughter, and we raised them from the beginning vegetarian. Again, when they were born, they're 27 and 29. So when they were born, we just, vegan just wasn't in the atmosphere quite yet. And when they were little, we wanted them to feel like they had some part, in the decision. So we said, if you go to a friend's house, we told them why they were vegetarian. We said, we just don't believe in eating our animal friends. Because, for a small child, that's simple enough. We didn't go into any of the grueling details. And then we said, but if you're at a friend's house and there's something you're curious about and you want to try, then go ahead and do it. So it wouldn't become like the forbidden fruit. But they looked at us like we were crazy. We said, well, you just told us we don't eat our animal friends. So then why would we want to do that? So they never did. At this stage in their life, they've never had, neither of them have ever had meat. But the funny thing is they both love meat substitutes. Like I don't like meat substitutes and they love them. But so right around when they were like 10 and 12. Okay, so the age of the internet had begun. There was more information. I started to hear about what really goes on at dairy farms. And I thought, well, this really isn't making me feel very good. So we decided we're going to go to this local, well, it was luckily an hour north of where we lived at the time, to a really small dairy farm because they distribute some of their dairy products. I thought maybe if we get them from a small farm, not from like a factory farm, we'll feel better about, using dairy products.
Mm-hmm.
So we went up there, and it was a really nice farm with, the cows out in the meadow. But then the farmer showed us where the cows get impregnated. Then I saw the crates with the little calves in them. And I said, well, what about those calves? And he said, well, they're probably going to become veal. So, once you see it with your own eyes, I felt like I just couldn't do it anymore. But it was my son, who was 10 at the time. He declared. He was the first to declare. I was like the next day. And so it was the summertime, and they were going to some sort of camp, and I had sent the rice cheese sandwich with them. It wasn't even real cheese, but he thought it was cheese, and he brought it home. And I said, well, why didn't you eat your cheese sandwich? And he said, well, because now I'm a vegan. And I said, well, first of all, it's rice cheese, but second of all, couldn't you have gone vegan after lunch? So, but once he decided, it was like he would rather go hungry. So he's still very strict vegan. My husband went back to eating eggs, and my daughter kind of slipped back for a while. Also eggs. Once in a while, she was living on her own in the city, eating pizza. But now we were just talking about this, and I feel like, it always has to be their decision, but she really loves the philosophy of veganism, and she said she's going to probably drop the eggs again soon. So that's how we all went vegan. And then your part 2 of that was, what do I like best about being vegan? I'll be really honest. I like the people. I just feel like the most awesome people are in the vegan movement, and both people that I know and that I don't know. And I just love that this choice and this consciousness really kind of symbolic of almost everything else they do. And I feel like that's probably true for myself as well. It's that deep caring and the compassion. So yeah, it's the people in the vegan movement. And you know what I was going to say, and the food isn't bad either.
Yeah.
The food is awesome. I feel like almost everybody I know who has become vegan says that it's really expanded their horizons rather than shrunk it, because you become much more adventurous and creative. So I like it all. And I also feel like it's made me more inclined to even hang out with animals. We have 2 really important farm sanctuaries right in my area, and I've done a few talks at one of them. One of them is Catskill Animal Sanctuary, and the other is the Woodstock Animal Sanctuary. And it is. It's just just being there with the animals. There's something so really soothing and amazing. They're like the innocence of our world.
Yes, I definitely agree.
Yeah.